Have you ever felt the creeping sensation of dread while dreaming, as if the very shadows around you are alive? I'm Evander Blackwood, a parapsychologist who spent years exploring haunted locations and the mysteries of the human mind, but nothing prepared me for the darkness that seeped into my own dreams. Tonight, I'm sharing a story so chilling that, even now, I hesitate to believe it was real. It all started with a dream, so vivid, so disturbingly real that I couldn't shake the feeling of damp earth and echoing laughter, even after I'd woken up. But as I'll soon reveal, it was far more than a dream. They say that nightmares are meant to fade in the light of day, yet this one stayed with me, weaving itself into my every thought, my every movement. I could feel a heavy, invisible presence lingering, as if I was being watched from just beyond my line of sight. It was as if this dream had bled into my waking world, leaving me haunted, on edge, always glancing over my shoulder. And the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became, a force urging me to uncover its secrets, even as I felt myself slipping into an abyss of fear. In that first encounter, I stood in an abandoned playground, cloaked in shadows, where time itself seemed to stand still. The silence was thick, almost suffocating, broken only by the faintest whispers of laughter from unseen children. I could feel their presence, an eerie reminder of lives once lost, or perhaps never truly gone. This place was soaked in darkness, and with each step I took, a chill ran down my spine, the kind that warns of unseen eyes watching, judging, waiting. But before we step deeper into this nightmare, if you're brave enough to explore the dark edges of reality with me, subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. The stories I share here aren't just tales, they're warnings from a world where nightmares refuse to fade, where every shadow may hide a secret better left unknown. If you think you can handle the horror that awaits, follow along. But know that not all stories are meant to be heard. Some things are best left buried in the darkness. The laughter was gone, but the silence that followed was even worse, thick and oppressive, pressing against me like a dark fog. I could feel the air grow colder with every breath, each exhale visible in the damp mist that clung to my skin. A growing sense of dread settled over me, as if unseen eyes were studying my every move, hidden somewhere in the shadows of this forsaken playground. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move, rooted to the spot by a paralyzing curiosity, a morbid pull that compelled me to venture deeper, to uncover whatever horrors lay hidden within. As I took another step forward, the ground seemed to shift beneath my feet, soft and uneven, like stepping on layers of rotting leaves. The scent of decay grew stronger, filling my senses with a sickly sweetness that clung to the back of my throat. It was then that I noticed strange markings carved into the wooden frame of the swing set, symbols scratched so deeply into the wood they seemed to bleed shadows. They were symbols I couldn't recognize, crude shapes that twisted in impossible ways, like warnings etched by desperate hands. My fingers reached out, almost instinctively, tracing the lines of one of the symbols. The wood felt ice cold, and as I touched it, an intense wave of nausea washed over me, almost doubling me over. Then came the whisper, a faint, chilling voice that drifted through the mist like a forgotten memory. They never left, they're still here. The words were barely audible, but they felt like needles pressing into my skin, each syllable leaving a stinging burn. My heart pounded in my chest as I spun around, trying to find the source, but there was no one. Only shadows, thick and silent, shifting at the corners of my vision. The playground itself seemed to breathe, the fog thickening around me, and I realized that I was no longer alone. Figures moved just beyond the mist, vague outlines that flickered in and out of sight, their forms thin and warped, twisted in ways that defied reason. Just as panic began to set in, I heard it again. That laugh, closer this time, louder, echoing as if it came from everywhere at once. I turned towards the sound, my eyes landing on the slide. The child's figure was still there, standing at the top, but now it was clear as day, too clear for a mere dream. I could see every detail, the tattered, muddy clothing, the hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the darkness around them, and the wide, unsettling grin stretching across its face. The child's head tilted, watching me with a curious malice, as if daring me to come closer. In its hand, it held a small, weathered doll with a face almost as hollow as its own, the fabric worn and faded, yet still bearing a smile that sent chills down my spine. My legs felt like lead as I took a hesitant step toward it, the weight of the dream pressing down on me, every movement a struggle. The fog thickened around us, swallowing the rest of the playground until all I could see was the child on the slide, illuminated by a faint, unnatural glow. And then, as if pulled by some invisible force, the child slid down, its hollow gaze locked on mine, never breaking eye contact. It stopped at the bottom, mere feet from where I stood, the doll now held out toward me, as if it wanted me to take it. My hand moved involuntarily, reaching for the doll, despite every cell in my body screaming to turn and run. Just as my fingers grazed the doll, the world shifted, a jarring, gut-wrenching sensation like falling through water. Shadows closed in from every direction, and I felt myself slipping, sinking into the darkness. The last thing I saw was the child's grin widening, the hollow eyes burning into mine as the mist consumed us both. In that moment, I knew. This playground was a place where shadows claimed the lost, a realm between dreams and something far darker. And I had just crossed its threshold. I found myself moving deeper into the playground, my surroundings thick with a kind of darkness that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. Each step I took was met with an unnatural stillness, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting. The fog was dense, curling around me like fingers, and my vision was limited to mere feet ahead. Shadows flickered at the corners of my eyes, their forms shifting and writhing, and every so often, I thought I caught glimpses of faces, distorted, twisted in silent screams. But each time I turned to look, they vanished, leaving only a suffocating emptiness. A strange buzzing sound began to fill the air, low and distant, vibrating in my bones. It was an unsettling hum that seemed to rise from the very ground beneath my feet, almost as if the earth itself was groaning in agony. The once rusted swings had begun to sway gently, though there was no wind. Their chains creaked, the sound amplified in the silence, echoing like whispers through the fog. I felt watched, surrounded by eyes I couldn't see, and a chill ran down my spine as I sensed them drawing closer, unseen but undeniably present just beyond the mist. Then, without warning, a figure darted past me, a blur of movement that sent my heart racing. It was quick, too quick to make out, but I could feel the faint brush of air as it passed, chilling and unnatural. My instincts screamed for me to turn back, to run, but something held me in place, an invisible force compelling me forward. As I moved, I noticed objects scattered in the dirt, an old shoe, a small ribbon, a stuffed bear half buried in mud, each item looking as if it had been lost there for years. They seemed like remnants, ghostly traces of those who had come before me and never left. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last, but I couldn't shake the feeling that these objects were somehow connected to the laughter and shadows that haunted this place. Suddenly, I spotted an old metal gate at the edge of the playground, its surface corroded and warped, as though touched by something unnatural. Beyond the gate, the fog grew darker, swirling like a living thing, obscuring whatever lay on the other side. My feet moved of their own accord, drawing me toward the gate. A strange pull took hold of me, a morbid curiosity that drowned out my sense of self-preservation. As I approached, I noticed a faint glow emanating from behind the gate, a sickly yellow light that flickered like a candle on the verge of burning out. It cast elongated shadows that danced and twisted, and though I knew I should stay away, I couldn't resist the urge to reach out. With trembling hands, I pushed the gate open, and the air seemed to thicken, pressing in on me like a vice. Inside, there was a small structure like a shed, barely standing, its walls cracked and sagging. The glow was coming from within, casting eerie patterns across the ground. I could hear faint whispers again, clearer now, overlapping voices that spoke in tones too low to comprehend, yet each word felt like a blade, sharp and cold. My hands shook as I reached for the door, the metal handle icy under my touch, and with a deep breath, I pulled it open. Inside, the walls were covered in scribbles, dark markings that twisted in spirals and jagged lines, all drawn in a substance that looked too thick and dark to be paint. In the center of the room, a single, decrepit rocking horse stood, slowly rocking back and forth as though touched by invisible hands. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, and I could feel something shifting in the darkness. My eyes fell on the floor, where dozens of tiny handprints, stained dark, seemed to crawl toward me. I could almost feel their cold, ghostly touch reaching out, pulling me deeper into this nightmare. And then, just as I was about to turn and flee, I heard it, a soft giggle, so close it could have been right behind me. I froze, every nerve on edge, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Slowly, I turned around, dreading what I would find. But there was nothing, only the fog, and that sickly yellow light casting shadows that twisted and morphed, almost as if they were alive. Standing in the shadowed shed, my heartbeat thundered in my ears, each beat a countdown to some unseen horror. The room felt alive, its walls breathing with whispers and shadows that seemed to stretch and curl toward me. My eyes locked onto a dark, hunched figure in the corner, barely visible in the sickly glow. It stood motionless, but I sensed it watching, its presence heavy, pressing down on me like a weight on my chest. My instincts screamed to run, but my body betrayed me, my feet frozen to the ground as the figure shifted, its silhouette twisting and elongating in ways that defied logic. The air grew thick, carrying a stench that turned my stomach, a mix of damp earth and something rotting, sour and cloying. As I stared, the figure began to turn, revealing features that sent a surge of icy fear through me. Its face was shrouded in shadow, but where eyes should have been, there were only hollow voids, empty yet somehow filled with a depth of darkness that seemed to pull me in. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque, unnatural grin that stretched impossibly wide, teeth jagged and sharp, glistening as if wet. Every part of it felt wrong, a twisted parody of humanity, like a nightmare come to life. My throat tightened, and I tried to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. I could feel the terror building, clawing at my mind, my muscles trembling as the figure took a slow, shuffling step toward me. Each movement was deliberate, almost agonizingly slow, as if savoring my fear. The rocking horse behind me creaked, swaying back and forth, though no one was there to move it. Shadows danced across the walls, shapes that seemed to come alive, contorting into faces with hollow eyes, watching, grinning, mocking. They filled the room, their silent stares locking onto me, amplifying the sensation of being trapped, of having no escape. And then, as if driven by some twisted curiosity, my eyes fell upon something lying on the floor between us, a small, old-fashioned music box, partially hidden under the dust and grime. The ornate carvings on its surface seemed strangely familiar, as if I had seen them somewhere before, perhaps in fragments of forgotten memories or buried nightmares. Without realizing it, my hand reached down, drawn by an inexplicable urge to open it. My fingers touched the lid, and instantly, the air around me grew colder, thick with an energy that seemed to pulse, as though the box held a heartbeat of its own. With trembling hands, I opened it. The music that played was haunting, a slow, eerie lullaby that felt both soothing and sinister. It resonated within me, each note filling the air with a chill that reached deep into my bones. As the melody played, I felt a strange sensation wash over me, as if the ground beneath me were shifting, blurring the line between dream and reality. The shadowed figure seemed to respond to the music, swaying with each note, its hollow eyes fixed on mine, unblinking, absorbing every ounce of fear I radiated. In an instant, the room warped, and I found myself transported, no longer in the small shed but standing in the heart of the playground. The swings moved on their own, creaking in sync with the eerie melody, and the fog had thickened, swirling around me like tendrils of smoke. The figure was gone, but its presence lingered, pressing down on me with a suffocating weight. Shadows surrounded me, shifting and moving with a life of their own, and I realized that I was not alone. Children's laughter echoed from every direction, distorted, as if played in reverse, their voices mingling with the haunting tune from the music box. Panic gripped me as I felt invisible hands tugging at my clothes, brushing against my skin with a chilling touch. The ground beneath me seemed to ripple, like the surface of a dark, endless pool. I could feel myself sinking, my feet pressing into the soft, yielding earth, as if something below was trying to pull me down, to claim me. In a moment of pure terror, I shut my eyes, willing myself to wake, to escape this nightmare that felt far too real. But when I opened them, I was still there, trapped, surrounded by shadows and laughter and that relentless, hypnotic melody. The playground felt alive, as if it were a creature that had been lying in wait, feeding off the fear of anyone unfortunate enough to stumble upon it. And I was ensnared, my every attempt to move met with resistance, my body growing heavier, as if I were being rooted to this cursed place. I tried to scream again, desperate to break free from the nightmare, but my voice was swallowed by the fog, lost to the laughter and whispers that filled the air. The music box in my hand stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that was even more terrifying, thick and endless. Then, as if released from an unseen grip, I was jolted back to my bed, drenched in sweat, my heart racing so fast it felt like it might burst. But something felt wrong. The cold touch of the shadows lingered on my skin, and in the corner of my room, barely visible in the darkness, the outline of a small music box rested on the floor, its lid slightly open. The haunting melody echoed softly, as if reminding me that the nightmare hadn't ended. It had only just begun. The next morning, I awoke with a lingering chill that clung to my skin like frost. The memory of that nightmare was as vivid as if I'd lived it, every detail seared into my mind. I could still hear the haunting melody from the music box, faint and echoing in the back of my head, like an unshakable shadow. As I stumbled out of bed, something glimmered on my nightstand, a small speck of dirt, dark and wet, the same kind that covered the ground of that haunted playground. My pulse quickened. I tried to dismiss it, chalking it up to coincidence, yet the unease gnawed at me, a weight in the pit of my stomach that refused to go away. Unable to shake the dream, I found myself obsessing over its every detail. My thoughts drifted back to the symbols carved into the wood, the empty, hollow eyes of that childlike figure, and the laughter that echoed in the mist. I opened my laptop, driven by a need to understand, and began searching for anything that could explain this strange playground. Hours blurred by as I scoured forums, local history sites, and archives, sifting through tales of haunted places and urban legends. Just as I was beginning to lose hope, a headline caught my eye: "The Vanished Children of Ashfield Playground." The article was old, grainy with age, its words barely legible, but the story it told sent a chill straight through me. Decades ago, a small, rural playground on the outskirts of Ashfield had been the site of a series of unexplained disappearances. Children had vanished from their homes, their last sightings eerily connected to that playground. Locals had whispered of shadows that moved on their own, of strange laughter heard echoing late at night. Those who dared to investigate often claimed they felt an oppressive force, like eyes watching them from the mist. I felt my stomach drop as each word seemed to pull me deeper, confirming details from my dream. It was as though the nightmare had come alive, its horrors spilling into reality. Unable to ignore the gnawing dread, I reached out to a few old-timers from Ashfield, hoping they might remember more about the playground's dark history. After a few hours, I received a reply from a woman named Edna, who warned me not to dig any further. "Some things are best left alone," she typed, her words a chilling echo of my own instincts. But Edna must have sensed my determination because, despite her initial hesitation, she agreed to meet with me in person. She said there were things about the playground that she couldn't explain, but would share with me if I was willing to listen. That evening, I met Edna at a small, dimly lit cafe. Her hands trembled as she recounted her own encounters with the playground, her voice barely more than a whisper. "People think it's just an abandoned park," she murmured, her gaze distant. "But that place, it's alive. I lost my nephew there. He went to play one afternoon and never came back. And he wasn't the only one." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she continued, describing how the local authorities had conducted countless searches, all ending in nothing but silence and despair. The children had vanished without a trace, their laughter swallowed by the mist, leaving only scattered toys and faint echoes behind. As she spoke, Edna mentioned the symbols, carved into the playground's equipment, twisted marks that no one could decipher. "Some say they're warnings," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Others think they're a curse." She shuddered, glancing around the cafe as if the shadows might be listening. I felt a chill ripple through me as she described seeing figures in the fog, children with hollow eyes, like the one from my dream. It was then I realized that this nightmare wasn't a creation of my subconscious. Somehow, I had crossed into something much darker, and it had followed me back. Desperate for answers, I returned to my research, diving deeper into local legends and old police records. With every discovery, the playground's sinister reputation only grew, each story more chilling than the last. Witnesses claimed they saw children who had been missing for years, standing in the mist, watching them with empty eyes before fading back into the fog. Others reported strange whispers that seemed to call out to them by name, luring them deeper into the playground's heart, where the air grew thick with dread. Each story bore the same elements: the laughter, the music box, and a presence that seemed to feed off fear, trapping those who ventured too far. My fingers trembled as I found myself tracing the same symbols Edna had mentioned, strange markings that matched the ones I'd seen in my dream. There was something ancient about them, symbols that seemed to call to me from a place beyond my understanding. Every line, every curve, felt like it held a secret, a dark truth buried in the fabric of that cursed playground. But the most disturbing part? These symbols had begun appearing in my own life, in the corners of my apartment, on the pages of my notebooks, even faintly scratched onto my skin as if by some unseen hand. The line between dream and reality was unraveling, each thread pulling me deeper into the mystery of Ashfield Playground. And though every instinct told me to walk away, I knew I couldn't. I was bound to this place, to its secrets, as if the darkness within it had claimed a part of my soul. And with each passing day, the fear grew stronger, the feeling that something was watching, waiting, and that the nightmare wasn't just a dream. It was an invitation, one I was no longer certain I could refuse. The pull of the playground became a haunting obsession, an itch I couldn't scratch, a dark whisper that grew louder with each sleepless night. No matter how much I tried to convince myself to leave it alone, I knew there would be no peace until I returned. So, on an overcast, silent evening, I drove out to Ashfield, each mile feeling like a descent into another world. As I reached the outskirts, I felt the temperature drop, the trees looming over me as if they were keeping secrets of their own. When I finally arrived, the playground lay before me, wrapped in a blanket of dense mist that seemed thicker than I remembered, almost alive. Every instinct told me to turn back, but an unexplainable force drew me in, as if the shadows themselves had extended invisible hands, guiding me toward the heart of the nightmare. I could barely make out the familiar shapes, the swings, the slide, the carousel, all coated in a film of decay and darkness. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the distant, eerie creak of the merry-go-round. It turned slowly, untouched, its movement a ghostly echo of children who had once played there. I took a step forward, my foot sinking slightly into the damp earth, and it felt like the ground was swallowing me, holding me captive in this cursed place. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A figure, a man, stood near the edge of the playground, watching me from the fog. He was older, his face lined and weary, his eyes sunken and haunted. He looked as though he had seen too much, as if this place had marked him in some unspeakable way. Hesitantly, I approached, feeling the hair on the back of my neck prickling with dread. His gaze never left me, his expression a mixture of pity and warning. "You came looking for answers," he murmured, his voice hollow, as if each word pained him. "But here, there are only shadows, and they don't let go." His name was Walter, a caretaker who had seen countless others drawn to this playground, only to leave shattered, or never leave at all. He spoke of strange occurrences he'd witnessed over the years. The laughter in the mist, the apparitions of children that appeared and disappeared like mirages. He warned me of the figures that lurked in the fog, children who had once been real, now hollow remnants of themselves, trapped between worlds, neither alive nor dead. Walter's words confirmed my deepest fears. I was not alone in my connection to this place. Others had been lured here, caught in its web of darkness and despair. As we spoke, he told me of a night years ago when he'd seen a small figure standing by the slide, a little girl who had disappeared from the town long ago. Her dress was torn, her face expressionless, her eyes voids of black that seemed to swallow light itself. She had looked at him, he said, with a silent plea, as if begging for help, before vanishing into the mist. "I tried to reach her," he whispered, voice breaking. "But she was gone, just gone." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of untold horrors, and I felt a chill settle over me, a dark certainty that the same fate awaited me. Without thinking, I moved deeper into the playground, my every sense heightened. Shadows twisted and danced at the edges of my vision, shapes that seemed almost human but distorted, as though reality itself was warping around me. My heart hammered in my chest as I pushed forward, feeling the fog grow thicker, each step dragging me further into the heart of darkness. The laughter returned, closer now, interwoven with faint whispers, voices that seemed to murmur secrets just out of reach. My skin prickled as a chill washed over me, and I felt invisible hands brush against me, cold and clammy, leaving trails of ice in their wake. Then I saw it, the entrance to a small, dilapidated structure I hadn't noticed before, partially hidden by vines and shadows. It looked like an old storage shed, forgotten and decaying, yet it called to me with a silent lure, as if something within waited, something that knew me, that wanted me. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a musty smell hit me, a blend of wet wood, decay, and something else, something faintly metallic like blood. Inside, I could see faint shapes in the gloom, old, broken toys scattered on the floor, a dusty, child-sized shoe lying on its side, a doll's head peeking out from beneath rotting wood, its hollow eyes staring up at me. Suddenly, I felt an intense pressure on my chest, a sensation of being watched, and I turned to see Walter standing at the doorway, his face pale. "It won't let you go," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Once you're marked, it follows you." He handed me an old photograph, faded and worn, showing a group of children standing by the slide, their expressions joyful and carefree. But as I looked closer, I saw something chilling. The faces of two children in the background were blurred, their eyes dark voids, just like the figures from my nightmare. And there, in the corner, was the faint outline of that same music box, barely visible, almost hidden in the shadows. As I looked up, Walter was gone, his footsteps fading into the fog, leaving me alone with the dark relics of forgotten lives. My hands shook as I clutched the photograph, feeling a strange compulsion to keep it, a sense that this was more than a memory. It was a piece of the playground's curse, a fragment of its soul. And then in the silence, I heard it again, that eerie, haunting lullaby, the same melody that had followed me out of the nightmare. It echoed through the fog, surrounding me, wrapping me in its sinister embrace. My legs felt leaden as I backed away, the shadows closing in, and for a fleeting moment, I glimpsed them, children, their hollow eyes watching me from the mist, their mouths twisted into silent screams. They reached out, their ghostly hands grasping, pulling, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and malice. I stumbled, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I turned and fled, the whispers and laughter chasing me, echoing through the fog like a dark promise. I knew, even as I escaped, that this was only the beginning, that the playground's grip was tightening and soon there would be no escape. The fog was dense and unyielding as I stumbled deeper into the playground, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. The whispers and faint laughter seemed to surround me, pressing against my ears, growing louder, more sinister, as if mocking my every step. My hand clutched the old photograph Walter had given me, the faded faces of children staring back with hollow, empty eyes. Each glance at the image felt like looking into a piece of my own doom, a dark foreshadowing of what lay ahead. My mind was clouded by a terror so profound that I felt myself teetering on the edge of reason, as if each step was pulling me closer to something beyond human understanding. Ahead, through the mist, a faint glow appeared, beckoning me. The eerie light pulsed gently like a heartbeat, illuminating a path that seemed to lead straight to the core of the playground. I followed, feeling the strange compulsion pulling me forward, each step a betrayal of every instinct screaming for me to turn and run. The light led me to a spot I hadn't seen before, a ring of old trees circling a stone pedestal, cracked and weathered with age. Atop the pedestal was the music box, the same one from my dream, its delicate carvings catching the sickly light, casting twisted shadows across the ground. I approached, drawn to it despite the cold sweat breaking out along my spine. The air around it felt thick, charged with an energy that was both mesmerizing and malevolent. My fingers trembled as I reached out, the silence around me so absolute that I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Just as my fingers brushed the box, the haunting lullaby began to play, filling the air with that slow, unsettling melody. It was softer now, but each note seemed to vibrate with an unnatural intensity, resonating deep within me, as if it were calling to something hidden in the depths of my soul. As the melody played, shadows began to gather around me, coalescing into familiar forms. The children I had seen in my dreams, their faces blank and their eyes black as pits, staring at me with expressions devoid of life. They surrounded me, their hollow eyes reflecting the fear I felt, trapping me within a ring of silent, spectral observers. Their mouths opened in unison, yet no sound escaped, their expressions frozen in a macabre, silent scream. I tried to back away, but my feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the shadows themselves had wrapped around my ankles, holding me captive. Suddenly, a presence loomed behind me, a darkness that felt ancient, powerful, and filled with a malevolent intelligence. I turned slowly, heart pounding, to see the figure from my dream, the child with the hollow eyes and twisted grin, standing just inches from me, its gaze locked onto mine. But now it was more than a child. Its form had changed, elongated, and in the shadows of its face, I could see glimpses of other faces, shifting and writhing as if trapped within it. The darkness in its eyes was endless, a void that seemed to pull me in, a glimpse into a place where light could never reach. It raised a hand, pointing to the music box, and I realized that I was holding it now, though I had no memory of picking it up. The melody continued, growing louder, faster, each note more frantic, and I understood what it wanted. The box was a gateway, a link between the world of the living and whatever dark realm this creature inhabited. To stop the music, to close the gateway, I would have to break it. But as I raised my hand, ready to shatter the box against the stone, the creature's grin widened, its hollow eyes narrowing with a look of almost human malice. In that moment, I felt a strange familiarity, a dark revelation that chilled me to the core. The faces within the creature's form, the twisted, frozen expressions, they weren't strangers. I recognized them. They were people who had come to this playground, just like me, drawn by an insatiable curiosity, by a need to understand the darkness that lurked here. They had looked into the same abyss and had not returned. And now they were part of it, part of the creature that watched me, waiting to add my face to its collection. A wave of dread washed over me as I realized that breaking the box might seal my fate, binding me to this place forever. I hesitated, trapped between the terror of remaining and the horror of what awaited me if I joined those lost souls. In that heartbeat of indecision, the creature moved closer, its face shifting into a twisted mirror of my own. I felt its cold breath against my skin, its hollow eyes reflecting my fear. I had to choose, to shatter the box and risk becoming part of this darkness, or to flee, leaving the nightmare to claim others who would come after me. Desperation filled me, a primal urge to escape, but I knew that, no matter where I went, this place would follow, the music box a cursed relic tying me forever to the playground. With one final, trembling breath, I raised the music box high and smashed it against the stone. The sound shattered the air, a piercing cry that seemed to split the fog and silence the whispers. The shadows around me recoiled, the children's faces contorting in silent agony as the creature let out a guttural, inhuman wail. The ground beneath me trembled, the trees creaking and groaning as the fog began to recede, pulling the shadows with it, like an invisible hand sweeping them away. And then silence. I was alone, the playground empty, the mist dissipating to reveal nothing but rusted swings and broken slides, as if the nightmare had never happened. But as I turned to leave, a faint sound reached my ears, the echo of a child's laughter, distant and fading, as if carried on the wind. I felt its cold touch linger on my skin, a dark promise that this was far from over. And though the music box lay in shattered pieces at my feet, I knew deep down that the playground's curse hadn't been broken. As I walked away, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a nearby puddle. For a moment, my face twisted, hollow-eyed and grinning back at me, the shadow of the playground etched into my own features. And in that instant, I knew I had not left it behind. The playground had taken something from me, a part of my soul, and I would carry its darkness with me, forever haunted by the echo of that eerie, endless melody. The days that followed were a blur of uneasy silence and creeping dread. I tried to forget the events at the playground, but the memories clung to me, woven into my thoughts like dark threads. Every night, as I lay in bed, I could feel it, a faint, chilling presence lingering just beyond the edges of my perception, a shadow that seemed to watch me waiting. And then, just as I would drift off to sleep, I would hear it, that faint, haunting melody from the music box, so soft it could almost be mistaken for the wind, but unmistakable, as if it were playing from somewhere deep within my mind. I told myself it was just residual fear, my imagination conjuring ghosts that weren't real. But no matter how much I tried to dismiss it, the signs began to multiply. Objects around my apartment shifted subtly, just out of place enough to make me question my sanity. My reflection in mirrors looked slightly off, as if it were studying me, waiting for something I couldn't comprehend. And worse, I began to see symbols, those same twisted carvings from the playground, appearing in places I knew I hadn't touched. They would show up in the fog on my bathroom mirror, etched faintly on my windows, even faintly scratched into my skin. It was as though the playground was reminding me that it hadn't let go. One night, after an exhausting day, I collapsed into bed, hoping for a dreamless sleep. But the nightmare returned. I was back in the fog-drenched playground, standing before the shattered remains of the music box. The figures of the children surrounded me, their hollow eyes watching with a hunger that sent shivers through me. I tried to scream, to escape, but my feet wouldn't move, as if the ground itself had claimed me. One of the children stepped forward, its face twisting into a grin that mirrored my own terror. "You're one of us now," it whispered, its voice soft and chilling, echoing in my mind long after I woke. When I bolted upright, gasping for air, I found myself covered in cold sweat, my hands trembling. But something else caught my attention. There on my nightstand lay a small fragment of the music box, the carvings on its surface glinting in the dim light. I knew it hadn't been there before. Panic surged through me as I realized that the nightmare was seeping into my waking life, dragging pieces of that dark reality into my own. It wasn't just a memory. The playground's curse was still with me, haunting me, binding me to its secrets. I tried to rid myself of the fragment, throwing it out, burning it, but it always returned, like a ghost that couldn't be laid to rest. And with each reappearance, the presence grew stronger, the shadows around me darker, thicker, until they felt almost solid. I could feel it watching, waiting, as if the playground itself were alive, stretching its reach beyond its boundaries, pulling me back into its grasp. My every attempt to escape was futile, the curse like an invisible chain I couldn't break. Finally, desperate and terrified, I returned to the few people I had told about my experience. Their faces reflected pity, disbelief, and the dark fear that I might be slipping into madness. But I could see something else in their eyes, A faint trace of recognition, a subtle shift that suggested they too felt it, as if the curse were spreading, attaching itself to anyone who dared to listen. The playground had reached beyond its shadowed grounds, leaving a trail of terror and mystery that no one could ignore. And I knew deep down that my story had become its story, a warning for those who would come after me. Now, I'm telling you this not just as a recounting of events, but as a warning. The playground is more than just a place. It's a presence, a darkness that clings to those who encounter it, a nightmare that doesn't end when you wake up. So if you feel drawn to places like Ashfield Playground, to shadows and whispers and things left best unexplored, remember my story. Because sometimes, nightmares follow you into the daylight, lurking in the corners of your mind, waiting for the moment when you're most vulnerable. If you felt that pull, that faint lure of the unknown, or if you think you've seen those hollow-eyed figures lurking in your dreams, then the playground has already touched you. And it won't let go, not until it has what it wants. If this story has left you with questions, or if you felt the presence I'm describing, don't hesitate to leave your theories in the comments below. But beware, talking about it only seems to make it stronger, to draw it closer. So subscribe if you're brave enough, leave a like if you dare, and share this story with those who have an appetite for the unknown. Because Ashfield Playground's secrets may just be beginning, and the darkness is always waiting.